All right. All right, I'll try not to drone on and miss all my question time. All right, hi you guys. Thanks a bunch for presenting and coming. It's nice to see everybody. Feels like you're in a bubble lately. Anyhow, so I do the St. Peter's Fellowship Farm. This is our sign in our garden, and one of my helpers painted it. Anyhow, she did a nice job with the sign. So basically, our farm is in Sitka. It's a small farm. It's located between two different sites. Basically, in 2008, there's a health summit meeting in Sitka every year, community health, and the participants get together and they say, what does Sitka need to be more healthy? And in 2008, the vote was, the top priority was, we need access to local foods. So that spring, a group of people pulled together the Sitka Local Foods Network, the volunteers who were the most active in making this happen. And we are the nonprofit part of Sitka Local Foods Network. So basically, the Episcopal Church offered up the use of their backyard. Volunteers built beds. Whoops. Oh, next. Sorry, I keep forgetting. So next. Oh, that's right. I'm doing a slideshow at the same time. So this is our logo. This is what they do, increase the amount of locally grown and harvest food in the diet of Southeast Alaskans. Next. This is volunteers building garden beds so that they can have local foods in Sitka. So the Episcopal Church gave up their backyard, volunteers built the beds and started gardening. Several months after the Health Summit vote, the farmers market was in place and volunteers were selling vegetables grown in the church backyard. Next. So basically, the remarkable thing about Fellowship Farm is that it was a community project started in 2008, and Sitka Local Foods Network is also same thing, and they just keep going. So basically, next picture, please. 14 years later, everybody's still going. That's what's remarkable, I think. So yeah, I'll talk about the farm, but in all honesty, it's kind of a story about a community taking on a project. I've been doing it for almost 12 years now. I'm the contract employee farmer, basically. So this is my perspective on what happened, what worked or didn't, how production has changed over the years, and what the takeaway might be from all of this. Next. When I started in 2011, these are just random photos. This has nothing to do with what I'm talking about because, yeah, it's hard to take pictures about some of these things.
Do you want me to just go to the next every couple of minutes?
No. This,
okay.
I'll get back on track. This is just I had to philosophize for a second, and we got the rhubarb picture. We'll suffer through the rhubarb picture for the moment. Okay. Anyhow, so when I started, the farm and the market were transitioning from complete volunteer efforts, but the original crowd who started in 2008 was obviously feeling overwhelmed with their workload, since they were all working full time and trying to volunteer and do this on the side. So they had set up a way to have contract positions in which a manager was hired for each the market and for the farm. The compensation was limited, but it was better than volunteering. The original farm job description suggested a 10-hour work week over a several-month period, which I find amusing because, as you know, any farmer, just a few months and 10 hours a week is kind of not quite what the reality is. And on the weekends, there was typically volunteer work parties, Okay, next picture, please. Okay, so when I started, this is what the farm looked like. You can notice the picnic table, fire pit, it's looking like a recreational site more than a farm, you could say safely. Anyhow, I wanted to increase production. I wanted to go big, make some changes. Next, I built more garden beds. I worked to decrease wasted space. There's more permutations of more maps and whatnot over the years. Basically, I hauled tons of seaweed, sand, bunny and horse poop, excavation source dirt to make more soil. I added thousands of pounds of fish carcasses into beds. I worked towards a more efficient design, wishing for uniformity when possible. To extend the growing season, I started with corrugated plastic lids framed on lumber, which I now have a very strong aversion to because they are the world's most heavy, awkward things. Then I moved on to next PVC hoops and ripstop plastic. All in all, in the first, I don't know, 5-6 years, well, actually 4 years, I tripled the growing space at the church site. The community was supportive of all this. Folks donated work time during their work parties. They donated small greenhouses. They donated old plastic, extra tools, etc. Several families called up, offering up the use of their garden space. And we signed a memorandum of agreement to farm an established garden, the Arvin family garden, in exchange for like weekly vegetables. And we gained another 1,000 feet of garden beds. Next. This is the space we inherited, my rudimentary drawings. So basically, and this is when the farmers market was kind of getting going. Next. Farmers markets typically had 20 to 30 vendors. There were indoor and outdoor sites. Many different folks found ways to augment their income with sales of baked goods, candies, caramels, salt, seaweed, tea, medicinal products, mushrooms, plants, pottery, you name it, basically. There was live music and food trucks. Next. So this is looking down at our parking lot. This is, we had outdoor tents. There's a band here. The food trucks are parked like here and over here. And then to the left, if you're looking at the slide, there's a whole big building with additional vendors. Next. And this is just one little, I couldn't find any good photos of the farmers market, sadly, but there's usually maybe 15 vendors inside the A and B hall when it wasn't COVID. Anyhow, so that's what it looked like. Chelan Produce also allowed us to sell their produce without a markup during their Sitka visits. And they would come, so they're based out, Dave Kensington, based out of Petersburg, allowed us, bless his heart, allowed us to sell our produce. So we had a weekly place to sell produce, which was super handy. So we basically have farmers markets every other week. And then Chelan was on the in-between weeks, usually, give or take. Okay, so basically now I had a much larger farm. I had done the revisions to the church property, and now we could use the Arvin's garden. I built a lot of great soil and growing beds. We could sell produce weekly. We hosted a Bulldogs on Baranoff Yale intern for 6 years, which helped a lot with labor for the farm and markets. Basically, it was a program that college kids wanted to come do some kind of experience. And so we get a student for 6 weeks a summer. We had a family that would host the intern, provide room and board. And then we provided a small stipend and adventures. So this is one of a real sweetheart that spent a long time with us. Anyhow, this is one of her adventures. And while I had the labor force, this is also part of my labor force, bless their hearts. Anyhow, I spent a lot, okay, next. I spent numerous summers carefully record keeping, tracking each vegetable, identifying the sales per square foot, and a rough estimate of labor per crop. I was really hoping to increase sales and production. Typically, we were now able to sell between $6,000 and $9,000 of produce each summer. Remarkably, however, despite the farm expansion, profits and production were not jumping wildly. Labor, however, did increase hugely. So basically, on the packet, so if you look at my little chart here, the dates to maturity column shows what the package says that each seed would take to grow. So beets should be 55 days. But what I found is they actually took 98 days. Carrots should be 58. They actually took 81. So in other words, what I'm finding is that this really is not growing very quickly in Sitka. It's just not that great. And I figured out, how much money I could make per square foot and what the labor was per, whatever, per product. Basically, I figured out that unless I physically killed myself, there was no way I could make a significant profit. I found that unless we had a warm spring, production was terribly impacted. And it seemed that basically every other year was not a good spring. Maybe every 1 out of 3 was really bad. Sadly, I could still continue to weed daily and labor ceaselessly, but nothing, if it wasn't warm, nothing grew except for weeds. Anyhow, so I was curious about what makes Sitka unique weather-wise. Next. We have an early frost-free date, earlier than most people in Southeast, and we have a later frost-free date than most people in Southeast. But what I found is that it doesn't actually help us, because the median temperature in June, for example, is 56 degrees. You can see Haynes is in red, they're 62 in June. 61 is Juneau, 59 is Petersburg, Ketchikan is running about 58. But basically, remarkably, you guys are warmer in June. We really lag behind. And what I found is that what wheat doesn't love a 57-degree month. Next. As you can see from the growing day comparison, it takes Sitka 3 weeks longer to get up to 200 degrees on the chart. Okay, next. And the other thing that was interesting is that we tend to be much windier, and both of my farm sites are quite vulnerable to wind. So what I found is that we're getting almost twice as much wind as a lot of the other places. You can see Sitka is running at 8, and then everybody else is between 5 and 4. That was kind of interesting. Anyhow, next. So Sitka Local Foods is continuing on. They're doing, they're operating the farmers market. They're expanding gardens in Sitka. They're providing education and assistance for local foods. Next. They've also assisted with other health summit goals. They assisted with planting apple trees or fruit trees all over Sitka. They did a community food assessment. They also offered weekly spring garden and local foods classes, how to grow potatoes, chickens 101, composting, container gardening. One of the other programs that Sitka Local Foods did was a garden mentoring program. Next. Wherein a team would help a family build garden beds and soil, and then they would assist them throughout the summer. They would provide education and help track any problems or tell them what they might need to do over the summer. So these are those pictures. One summer, Sitka Local Foods changed their approach to the farmers market. They were hoping to have a smaller, more focused on local foods market. And so they tried to decrease the size of all the vendors, because a lot of the vendors were actually crafters. There was no stipulation as to what people needed to do to participate in the market. So you had a large portion of the market was actually not related to food in any way. Anyhow, but what they found was that without the critical mass, i.e. getting rid of some of the crafters, you didn't have as much of a hub for the market, and it didn't actually work. So we went back to that. Another topic that the board and myself deliberated about was separating, should we separate the farm from the nonprofit? Most farms are like self-functional and they can stand on their own and, make it happen. Anyhow, so basically there's no slide for the next thing. So we're going through cost benefit analysis. Is this worth it? Community members really want to have a market. They want access to local foods. They want to be able to create and sell products, and they want to be able to buy local products. At this point, I was just like 7 years in it, and my records did not suggest vegetable profitability or any great potential. We deliberated a lot. We just, wanted to make sure we weren't being stupid. We talked about what to go forward. We felt that it was still a worthy pursuit, however, and we decided it was either a team project or not worth doing. But it seemed like it was of value to our community and that we could do it in a way that was mostly sustainable. Okay, so next. Since we decided to continue, what do we need to do? What can we do next? So basically, because we were gardening on Episcopal Church property and the Arvin family garden, I obviously was not super, I didn't really like Leah and Nick were talking about. You don't really feel like you're a guest and you don't feel like you can do whatever you want on this property. I was very hesitant to build more significant structures. But it seemed like if we were going to continue on, we needed to make some changes. So I asked, everybody was incredibly generous, allowing us to even be on their property. But if we wanted to do this, we needed a good growing environment. So I requested permission to build at the church site, and the Episcopalian governing body was incredibly generous and approved. Over the next 3 years, we built 3 tunnels. We had this bigger tunnel here is a 2 by, it's 28 feet by 16 feet wide, because that's what fits in the space. This smaller tunnel is 20 feet by 10 feet. And and then we built another one. And because the other one was in the place where wasn't a good spot, we moved that one over. Anyhow, I don't know what I'm pointing to my slide, but you guys probably are annoyed watching me wave my hands around. You can tell from the front of these tunnels that we've put in fans and louvers. They're set up with a thermostat. So when it gets warm in there, they open up and they, let air out, which is really nice. So basically, kind of like Leah and Nick, at some point you're like, is this worth doing? Should we do this? Yeah, I mean, we're right on the edge of being, well, something just dinged. We're right on the edge of whether or not we should bother. But what I found, so here's some little nuts and bolts that we found worked. 1, create a better growing environment. Capture the warmth, shelter from the wind. I either use PVC hoop plastic, I use the high tunnels, or I use a ground cover plastic. The ground cover plastic works really well for leeks in onions, for example, or leeks in garlic, for example, and potatoes. The PVC hoops, okay, next, PVC hoops. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this one. This is the inside of the tunnel. I just put wood around to kind of hold the dirt in place and let everything grow. And it works so much better. Can I just say how much better it works? Okay, next. Anyhow, so here's PVC pipes and plastic. They're great, except for you need a next to manage the tubes. So because the temperatures change so dramatically in them, a garden gnome is quite handy for that. The tunnels moderate temperatures much better, especially with the wiring. I reuse the ground cover for several years. I also use Remay, like Catherine was using inside the tunnels, whatnot. Yeah, I start most plants indoors and then I transplant outdoors and cover. Next, also handy flame weeding. This isn't a great one, but it does the job. I don't leave, just like Leah and Nick were talking about, I don't leave any bed exposed because the weeds are on fire in my garden right now. I cover with plastic, seaweed, or cardboard. Cover cropping sounds great. Green manure sounds great, but my season just doesn't work for it, and slugs love it, which I don't need help getting more slugs. Crop selection next. Crop selection, I basically grow cold weather crops. In the high tunnels, I do zucchinis vertical, per Marian Bo's advice. Cucumbers, I usually can't get, I mean, every once in a while, maybe every 3rd summer, I can get them to do really well, but the other summers, they just die. Anyhow, I rotate through potato and brassica beds so they don't see continuous use. Next, oh, I don't really have a picture for that. Never mind. Basically, I do a lot of fish carcasses. I used to do a lot of fish carcasses, and they provide a lot of heat value to the soil above where you've trenched them. I'm now certified naturally grown. We wanted to support that program and provide that for our customers. So you're not allowed to do any of that anymore. Horse manure and fish scraps, or just horse manure, make really nice compost. Seaweed and sand are great. I amend with bone meal, alfalfa meal, and crab meal. I do low tillage. I prep forks, broad fork style, and I do most chores by hand. Okay, so this is some pictures just of our market. You can see the Alaska grown product. That really helps us with our sales. We do as many interesting and innovative Alaska grown products as we can think of. We look all over the state and bring those to our markets. Next. So this is like produce. We usually have 3 or 4 tables. This is COVID time, so this is a little different. There's nothing very fancy looking here, but you can see the salsas and the odds and ends there. Next. And odds and ends. And these are our farmers market. One of the gal on the left is our farmers market manager, bless her heart. Basically, what works for us as a nonprofit organization? Basically, having a great group of people dedicated to a cause. 14 years of having a board provide a lot of support to markets and farms, and just running a nonprofit is huge. It's what allows me to be a farmer, basically. We've had tons of different people who've taken turns at being on our board, and we really, really appreciate it. The other thing that's important as a nonprofit is find ways to make it self-sustaining. Selling Alaska products is huge. That's, it makes it way more profitable for us. Every vendor at the market, and it depends, every year the market has been changing lately because of COVID, but everybody pays a table fee, and the table fees and the advertising, we also have local businesses that pay for advertising. So between those two pieces, our compensation for our markets manager is covered by those, basically. We also write grants. Charles, bless his heart, writes grants, and then we get monies to supplement WIC and SNAP benefits. So basically, if you have a food stamp or a SNAP benefit, you can cash in your $20 of that benefit and then get an additional $20 worth of produce. So that feels really nice to make vegetables more accessible to, not just people who have more money, because growing stuff is kind of expensive. Anyhow, the farm sales basically cover my cost of compensation. Learning how to deal with COVID has been interesting as well. We went to boxes for a while. We went to deliveries. We went to pickups. We've had to be quite flexible. It's worked. It's been challenging, but it's worked. Basically, we're just really grateful to the volunteers who make all this happen. And we're happy to be part of creating local food. And it does, it does make people feel more food secure, and our community has been really supportive. And being able to help create a social and commerce hub is what we aim to do. And even though we're not doing it like lucratively or like standalone farmer type, we're still doing it, which is, what Sitka Local Foods has aimed to do. So that's what we're doing. Slides next. Sorry, see what else we have. So this is one of our boxes. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Next. And this is, of course, now that you have tunnels, what do you have? The leisure tunnel. Over, I'm done.
Thank you, Laura. I'm sure you spend a lot of time sitting in that chair, right? Yep. Applause, Laura. Thank you, Laura, for sharing your story. So we'll go ahead and start the questions for Laura. Go ahead, Bo.
First question is, why are your leisure chairs so uncomfortable looking?
I don't know. I've never actually sat in them.
Folks wanted to know if they could have access to your fancy weather charts.
It's all on WeatherSpark. They're awesome. I thought it was so cool. You just go in, you go to WeatherSpark, and you can pick locations that you want to compare, and it'll make charts for you. it was really cool. That was fun.
Is it just like weatherspark.com or something?
Yeah, I can't remember if it was .com but it's WeatherSpark.
Okay, I just added that to the chat box.
Yeah. No, it was very interesting. And I'm sure, there's different locations that have more or less of those very, every little niche is different, but it was interesting just to see that for a lot of Sitka, that's what it was.
And then as far as your hoop house, your high tunnel ventilation system, that I'm assuming that that's thermostatically controlled with
Yeah.
electricity. Is that
Yes,
correct?
correct. Yes.
So
Yes, the church allowed us to crawl underneath and wire all the way out. We have like 50 feet of extension, not extension cord, but wiring. We spent a couple months wiring and crawling under. They actually have a lot of cats that live under there. It's quite disgusting. But yes.
And that's fully automatic. Even on really hot days, you don't have to do.
Yeah.
The grower doesn't have to go in there and open things up. It
Yeah,
ventilates.
no, it opens up. I mean, it actually, yeah.
What temperature do you control for? Like, what do you set it at to open?
Usually 75.
75.
Depends on what I'm growing in there.
So you're naturally grown certified, and that's affected your use of fish carcasses. I'm just trying to figure out why they would object to using fish carcasses.
Because any decomposing protein can have germs that can be dangerous.
So it's not an organic type thing. It's more.
No. It's a safety regulation. Yeah.
Laura, can you talk a little bit more about what certified naturally grown means, maybe for people who haven't heard of that or who are thinking about doing that at their place? What did that mean?
Yeah, I wish I brushed up on my comprehension of it. Basically, it's a nationally run organization that allows people, sometimes it's prohibitively expensive to become organic, and there's not organic inspectors in your area. It's just impossible to become organic. And a certified naturally grown is like the next step below organic, where you don't go through the same processes, but you still have a elaborate set of guidelines, and you have a set of inspections that allows you to be as close to organic as you can be without the FDA kind of whatever.
And what does the inspection process look like for you as a farmer?
You have to find another grower who reads through the 15 pages of permissible yes, permissible no, and then they go through your garden with you once a year.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, it's very doable in almost any community.
So you'd recommend it from your experience?
I mean, you pay a certain amount of money every year. If everybody in town knows you and suddenly you go certified naturally grown, it's probably not going to make any difference. But if you want to establish something to, show people the level, and you're a nonprofit and you want to help support this nationally run organization, yeah, it's great. There's pros and cons. It's a little bit expensive. It's like $120 a year, I think. I can't remember, but it's a great thing to support because it's really valuable nationwide. Yeah.
Right.
Is it in your budget? Maybe not. I don't know. Yeah.
So you basically are operating a farm with two different plots that are separated physically. How far apart are they?
They're about 3.5 miles apart.
So what problems have you had with that? Like spotting tools at different places, or do you have to have duplicates of everything?
Well, basically the church garden, I do everything intensive. Anything that's going to need a lot of care goes there. And the Arvin garden has a lot of stipulations. I'm waiting for that to drop out because there's some health problems that the owner has, and she's quite elderly. Who knows when I could lose that garden any minute. It's totally insecure. But they also don't like rattly, flappy plastic things. They don't like covers. They don't like a lot of different things. So I try to be very respectful of what they would prefer. And the church garden, bless their hearts, they've been very kind in letting us take, commandeer their backyard basically and make it, ours. I mean, not really, but they've been incredibly tolerant. But yeah, the other site is completely insecure, and it could easily no one takes care of the yard anymore, and so it's a sea of dandelions in every single direction. It's bright yellow every single way, looking from the little spit of land that I have. It makes me want to cry when I get there. Like, oh God, I don't want to open this garden bed. I can't take this mulch off because I'm doomed. So yeah.
So what about like having multiple sets of tools that you have to move back?
I do. I keep a set of each. I mean, not everything, but yeah. I mean, the basic shovel, whatnot. I have a set at each.
Someone asked about growing zucchinis vertically. Can you talk more about that?
You guys should talk about that.
Go for it, Laura.
I'm terrible at taking pictures while I'm working in the garden. I have almost none, but basically I have holes in the garden and I Velcro little straps and send my zucchinis up as I can. Cucumbers are much more fun to do that with, but since I rarely get them to successfully grow, it's not as satisfying. But yeah, you take off the bottom branches and keep sending your zucchinis up. It takes a lot of your floor space back so you can actually maneuver through your tunnel. Otherwise you get stuck quickly.
Okay, this is a more complicated question.
I'm sorry, I can't do those.
So at the beginning, I'm just going to read it. At the beginning of your project, how were the garden manager's wages paid?
I mean, basically, it was money that the Sitka Local Foods accrued, or they sold the product at the market, and then they would give me back compensation for my time. Does that answer it? I mean,
that was Mardell. So maybe Mardell, if you want to elaborate more on why don't you just unmute and elaborate a little bit more on what you're after here, if I'm not...
Yeah, Laura, my question is, we have a project here in Haines that is a nonprofit community garden, and we're at the beginning phases struggling is how can we get and compensate a garden manager? I get once you're on the road and you are actually producing and all of that, that makes sense to me. But I guess I would like some insight in how that started. And then my second part of the question is, how many hours do you put in? Because when you said that 10 hours, there's been people here in Haines batting around, oh, I think 10 hours a week is enough. I would like you to do a realistic picture of that.
Yeah. I wasn't around for the very beginning of the farmers market, but initially I would guess that in a summer they might earn $1,000 and they would be working 6 different weekends to put on a market. And it's a 2-3 hour market. So it wasn't hugely lucrative, but you could pretty much guarantee that you would get enough profit from the market and the other vendor fees to reimburse that market manager. And then over time, as we became more solid and had more vendors, the vendor fees would cover a larger amount. So the market manager had more work because they had more vendors. But over time, that compensation has increased as well. Same with the farmer. The farmer started out with very little compensation and over time has grown in, compensation. I mean, it's still a borderline volunteer position, don't get me wrong, for both of them, but at least you already have people who want to volunteer and work towards this objective. And if you can compensate them in some way, then you're doing a lot better.
And so what percentage of your time is managing volunteers and what percentage is actually gardening? And like how many hours a week? That's a hard question. And then I'll stop.
No, that's a good question. In all honesty, I don't do a lot of volunteers now. I have my children are in high school. I've worked the heck out of them. And a lot of their friends. Unfortunately, I know their friends. And so whenever I need help with different things, like I have the high school class of 2022 that helps me harvest every Friday, you know? And I reimburse, they earn a certain amount per hour. I have a certain pool of money set aside for, you know, the harvest times or the whatever to reimburse kids basically. Volunteer work parties, I mean, occasionally I'll do something, but in all honesty, I found them not super productive for accomplishing a lot. They were mostly a lot of work prepping them. And then afterwards, when you didn't necessarily get through what you wanted to, you got to do it all yourself afterwards. I mean, I'm not trying to be mean to my work party, but sometimes it's just hard to, I don't know. It was just tricky. So and I also was, you know, being a parent and having your kids off on the weekend, the last thing I want to do on a weekend was, you know, not have a weekend and not get to do stuff with my family. So I was not eager to, you know, organize long projects every Saturday and Sunday. So I opted to just either do it myself or find someone who I worked with enough that they knew what to do, rather than having a whole bunch of people show up at once who didn't know what they were doing and trying to orchestrate them in an effective manner. That was tricky. So, yeah. And no, I don't work 10 hours a week. I probably work 10 hours a week starting in November, maybe. But yeah, no, it's,
Can you
in
give a
March,
ballpark about how much you think to maintain the area that you're growing there, about how much time a week? I mean, I know it's hard, but
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it depends on the month. In March, you know, April, you're really busy. May, you're really busy. June's kind of, you wait around hoping it's warm enough, things will grow. I would guess I do at least 30 hours a week.
Great.
From March through October.
Yeah.
Because I'm there on the weekends. I'm, you know, you know, you're never not there. Once you start, you're on until October. Yeah. I mean, I might slug a little bit every once in a while, but you're kind of going. Yeah.
Cool.
Did that get everything you wanted, Mardell? You good? On a related question, Laura, maybe you answered it, I'm not sure, but are you compensated hourly or just a salary?
A lump sum. It's a contract, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think hourly would be very, it wouldn't look good.
Oh, what diameter is the greenhouse fan, and do you have like amount of air that it moves or something? What's the capacity of the fans?
You know, I just added a fan this last year, and it's a 25-foot square box that the fan lives in. So the fan's probably 24 inches, maybe, I don't know. And it turns over a lot of air. It also made a lot of noise, and our neighbor was grouchy, so we had to get a rheostat and turn it down notches, and we had to move the end of it, so now it's on the least functional side of the greenhouse. Anyhow, it's been kind of a hassle, but I'm not sure it was worth it. It's easier just to have a lot of windows and then have your vents, your louvers open, and then have suddenly airflow kicks in.
Oh, okay. So you're not necessarily saying that you're super happy with that system.
I mean, it's good, except for our neighbor was really challenging to work with on it.
Yeah.
And I can regulate a lot of airflow just by having the louvers, the thermostat open the louvers, and then I have pretty decent airflow. You know, like that little click on makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
If you have your windows open but no airflow, it's fine, and then you kick it, it open, it goes.
So have you oriented the tunnel so that the prevailing winds blow through them?
Yeah, and then I had to put the fan on the side that's the stupid side.
Mm.
Anyhow, good project.
Yeah. Do you have a formal lease for either one? Is there anything in writing, or is it just agreement?
I mean, there's a memorandum memorandum of agreement with the Arvin family, although we do it with her power of attorney because she's not, she can't really do it anymore. And then the church, we used to have something. I don't know what it is now. The board does that. I don't do that as the farmer.
Someone's asking if the naturally grown certification would allow for the use of seaweed. Do you know if that
Yeah.
would be?
Oh yeah. Yeah. You can do that.
So as long as it's not an animal product, they're talking about like bugs and crab shells and other stuff being in
I don't think they're that picky.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you got a rotting piece of meat, basically, that's when they get excited.
Yeah.
Not a
It
rotting
does
snack.
work charms, though, I tell you.
Well, I think we got them all, unless anybody else has additional questions.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks,
Again,
Laura.
I appreciate your time. Appreciate putting those slides together. Great to see what you're up to.